like for Bill Hasencamp to come up. He's our next speaker. Bill is the manager of Colorado River Resources with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. He manages the water supply programs to augment the Colorado River supplies. Bill, thanks for being here. Do you want to hold it? Let me put it.
I'll hold it. Thank you. Awesome. Of course, when you see your title slide up there, you realize that it's missing an A. So there should be an A in front of dwindling. You can feel free to write that in your books. I'm glad I wore my heavy coat this morning. I just wish I also had my gloves with me. But I have to admit I'm a little bit tired this morning. I was out late celebrating the Dodgers' victory last night, going to the National League Championship Series next week. So if I'm a little doze off a little bit, you'll have to forgive me. So I am with a small little water district on the coast of Southern California, Metropolitan Water District. We provide water to 1 in 17 people living in the United States. That's 1 in 9. We have 19 million people in our service area. And as I was driving down this morning from Manhattan Beach, I realized about 18 million of them must have been in front of me on the drive down because it was painful. But the story of Southern California is the story of bringing in water from faraway places. Los Angeles Aqueduct came first, meeting essentially the needs of the city of Los Angeles. Then the Metropolitan Water District was formed and tapped into the Colorado River in the 1940s. And then finally, in the 1970s, the State Water Project started bringing in additional supplies to Southern California. All of these supplies, however, have been cut back in the last few decades, not just from hydrologic drought, as Janine was saying, but regulatory drought and other increasing demands by other agencies that made less water available to Southern California. This is the 100th year anniversary of the Los Angeles Aqueduct. Today it provided 500,000 feet. On this 100th anniversary, it's going to deliver less water to Los Angeles ever than in the history of the aqueduct. And Alvin Bautista would be more than happy to explain where all that water is going to rewater Mono Lake, dust control on Owens Lake, Owens River, and other environmental uses. State Water Project, of course, that's been cut back for several reasons, and John Lehigh, I'm sure, will talk more about that. The Colorado River Aqueduct was always the backbone supply of Southern California. For 50 years, it was essentially drought-proof, delivering a full 1.25 million acre-feet each year to Southern California. It made Southern California weather the 1977 drought much better than Northern California because of our diverse supplies. But even that supply was finally cut back. And the Colorado Basin itself is the largest river in the United States that never reaches the ocean. It's completely used by all 7 states and the country of Mexico. And no water except some agricultural drainage water ever reaches the ocean. It's divided into 2 basins. Each basin receives the right to divert 7.5 million acre-feet, so 15 million acre-feet total, plus another 1.5 million acre-feet for the country of Mexico. Now, one of the deals when they divided up the river was that California was developing much quicker than any other state. And the deal was, if the other states aren't using their water, that water can be made available to California. So while California's allocation from the river was 4.4 million acre-feet, for more than 50 years, from 1950 to 2002, we diverted closer to 5.2 million acre-feet, or an additional 800,000 acre-feet every year because the other states didn't need it. That all changed, however, in the late 90s when Las Vegas was the fastest growing county in the nation, and Phoenix were growing, and finally the other states started using their water, and they told California, you have to cut back your use. So within California, the major contractors that get water from the river, Palo Verde Irrigation District is the highest priority in California. Imperial Irrigation District uses more water than any other state. Their historic use was over 3 million acre-feet a year. Coachella Valley Water District, and of course Metropolitan. And unfortunately for Metropolitan Water District, the law in California, the law of first and right, first in time applies. And the ag districts developed their system just a year or two before Metropolitan, and way back in 1931, they agreed how the waters of the Colorado would be divided up within the state of California. And the first 88% of California's 4.4 was reserved for agricultural use. Metropolitan's share was only 550,000 acre-feet. So if Metropolitan wants to have a full aqueduct, full supplies into Southern California, there's only two ways it can do it. One is if California takes more than 4.4, we can top off our fifth priority and move that water into Southern California, which I said we did that for 50 years. The second way is to reduce agricultural use, to fund conservation programs and water transfer programs so that they don't use 3.85, leaving more water for Metropolitan within the 4.4. Now, one of the things about the Colorado River is we don't see this variation in annual supplies like you do on the State Water Project. John Lehigh will every month look at the water supply in the snowpack in the Sierra, and every month update, here's how much water your contractors get. Sometimes it goes down, usually it goes up, but it's a year-to-year thing based on the snowpack. The Colorado is different because we have the largest reservoirs in the United States, Lake Mead being the single largest, and Lake Powell not far behind it. 60 million acre-feet of total storage on the Colorado Basin. 4 years of the annual flow can be stored. So on the Colorado, everything is tied to the level of Lake Mead in the lower basin, not to the snowpack on a year-to-year. And that's why Janine said it doesn't really matter this year how the snow is on the Colorado, but that will affect us in the future because it eventually translates into storage in Lake Mead. So the rules on Lake Mead are that if Lake Mead is more than 88% full, about 1,200 feet, there's virtually no limit on diversions downstream of Lake Mead. That would be to Arizona, Nevada, California, and Mexico. Is take all the water you want, and that's essentially the condition that we were in from 1950 to 2001. Then there's another trigger that favors just the urban agencies, knowing that Metropolitan Water District, Southern Nevada Water Authority, that provides water to Las Vegas, and Central Arizona Project, that provides water to Phoenix, are the lowest priorities in the state. If Lake Mead is more than 61% full, 1,145 feet, then surplus is made available in the amount shown on this slide. The last time Lake Mead was above that level was 2002. Then if Lake Mead starts to fall lower, we go into cutbacks. The first cutback is elevation 1075, or about 36% full. And if we get to that level, there would be a 333,000 acre-foot cutback to the state of Arizona and Nevada. Why not California? Back in 1964, in exchange for the Central Arizona Project receiving subsidized funds from the federal government to build the Central Arizona Project, a deal was cut that if there is ever a shortage declared on the river, the first shortage would go to those users that came online after 1964. And the users after 1964 are Central Arizona Project and Southern Nevada Water Authority. So they agreed to take the first shortages if we get to that level. We've never yet had a shortage declaration on the Colorado River in the 75 or so years since Lake Mead was filled. We've come very close a couple years, never yet there. If Lake Mead drops to 29% full, the shortage increase, and at 1050 is the current elevation limitation on Southern Nevada taking water out of Lake Mead. They are in the process of building a new intake, but as of today, if Lake Mead gets below 1050, they're out of water. That's a disaster for Southern Nevada. They are quickly building a new intake, which is scheduled to be online within 18 months to 2 years. If Lake Mead were to continue to drop to 23% of capacity, 500,000 acre-feet of shortage, and potential loss of power generation out of Lake Mead. Finally, if Lake Mead were to drop to 17%, even Southern Nevada's new intake wouldn't be able to meet its needs. There's no agreement on shortages, and essentially you'd have fighting among the river and major But as Pat Mulroy points out, Lake Mead is a V, so it starts to drop quicker. So even though it's 75 feet between the top level and the bottom, it's only about 18% of capacity. So it can drop fast when it starts getting towards the bottom of that V. Now, one of the key provisions that helped Southern California in 2007 was the ability to store water in Lake Mead. Now, they called it the Intentionally Created Surplus Program, or the ICS program. But it's really the ability for us to store conserved water in Lake Mead, because the rules before 2007 were use it or lose it. You divert all your allocation in a year, and there's no carryover storage. There's no San Luis where we can carry over water to the next year. It's use it or lose it. For the first time in 2007, we have the ability for a long-term storage in Lake Mead, realizing that Lake Mead probably won't fill up anytime soon. So that was a huge benefit to us because we could store water at no cost. We built Diamond Valley Lake Reservoir a decade ago, $2 billion for that important reservoir. This reservoir was created when the Secretary of the Interior signed the Record of Decision. No dollars expended, no environmental impacts. So we've taken advantage of that. We've had some decent years in Southern California, and our demands have dropped a little bit, and so we've been able to store almost 600,000 acre-feet in Lake Mead. And the key there is that the stored water counts towards those operational triggers on the previous page. So when we store water, Arizona and Nevada benefit because the rule of thumb is about 100,000 acre-feet is 1 foot in Lake Mead. So we've added almost 6 feet of storage to Lake Mead because of our storage program. So it's a win-win for the states and for us. So where's Lake Mead been since we've had to cut back? We've signed our agreements to the last decade. We got very close to surplus early on, and we got very close to shortage. We've bounced around in between those two. So this is essentially the top third is surplus, and the bottom third is shortage, and the middle third is normal. That's where we've been, and California's been limited to its 4.4 allocation. I will skip over Mexico. You have the information here, but Mexico was a 5-year deal. That first agreement did not deal with the country of Mexico. We reached an historic agreement last year, so now Mexico also has shortage, surplus triggers, the ability to store water like we do. One of the key pieces of that agreement was an environmental pulse flow to the currently dry delta. This is where the Colorado River used to flow into the Pacific Ocean. It was the only behind the Bay Delta as far as biological diversity, but it's been dry for several decades. And there's an effort to fund conservation programs in Mexico with U.S. dollars that will generate both a base flow and a pulse flow in 2014 for the first time to see how the formerly dry delta can react to some, at least a temporary pulse flow, and see if we can get maybe a long-term plan for bringing back some of that formerly great delta. So you might be hearing more about that in the next year. Okay, so where does the current drought fit in? This is a chart showing all of the years from when Lake Powell was built in 1964 to today of the runoff or the inflow into Lake Powell. And we had a really good year, 2011. That's when Lake Mead jumped up over 50 feet. But if you look at 2012 and 2013, those are the third and fourth driest year on records. So while things were improving a couple years ago, the last 2 years have been a disappointment, to say the least. In fact, I think that's the highest 2-year period on record, those 2 years. Now, one caveat, however, you may have heard of some of the flooding that occurred in Boulder, Colorado, Denver, Colorado. The basin itself had a very wet summer, and certainly a wet summer can't mitigate for a terrible snowpack, but we did get about an extra 600,000 or 700,000 acre-feet of inflow into Lake Powell, more than we thought on August. And usually by August, you're pretty much done. But we had, in places like Durango, Colorado, almost 10 inches of rain this summer. So that 2013 is going to be a little bit higher. Still probably the third driest on record, but at least some good news to end the water year as we start water year 2014. This shows the historic all the way back to 1905. This is the natural flow. This is a little different. The previous one was the actual flow into Lake Powell. This is the natural flow. And on the Colorado, the data isn't available as quickly. I'm envious of the State Water Project because they have the natural flows right away. You can see we're still 3 years behind on calculating the natural flow because you have to figure out all these miscellaneous diversions in the upper basin, add it back in, and try to get your natural flow. So we're always about 3 or 4 years behind on this particular graph, but we do have some estimates here. Couple things to point out. One is that you can see when the compact was negotiated in 1922, the average flow of the river at the time was about 16.5 million acre feet. So when they divided up the river back then, 15 million for the states and later 1.5 million for Mexico, there was enough water to meet all the demands. But the green line shows that now the average we know is below 15 million acre feet. So there's a chronic shortage on the Colorado River. There's not enough, even in average years, to meet all of the demands. And then when you throw on the red year, which is the short-term drought, we're now in the driest 10-year, this is the 14-year running average, the driest 14-year period on record. We're only averaging about 12 million acre feet of runoff over the last 14 years. So we have both a chronic problem that we have to deal with on the basin and then also the short-term problem of the drought conditions. So as a result, Lake Powell, which had been getting better, those last 2 years were really a killer. We were, after 2011, doing pretty good. Two of the driest 2-year period on record, Lake Powell dropped. And in 2007, we negotiated a new trigger on Lake Powell that says if Lake Powell gets below this elevation, which is about a third full, then it can release less water to Lake Mead, which means Lake Mead will go down even faster as a result. And this is the historic releases out of Lake Powell since 2000. And the normal minimum historically has been about 8.25 million acre feet. Now the forecast is that's going to drop down to 7.5 million acre feet to help protect Lake Powell, but it means that Lake Mead's going to drop even quicker. So this is the forecast that was made as of August, assuming average conditions going forward. This is not a drought forecast. This is average going forward. And Lake Mead is forecast to drop between August of over a 2-year period about 50 feet and go well below a shortage declaration by 2015, which would kick into shortage the following year. So you're always a year behind on the Colorado. So this would mean we would be going into shortage into 2016. Of course, if the drought continues, it could be a lot steeper and a lot worse. This is just the middle of the road projection. So what are the probability of surplus going forward in shortage? This was April 1. Reclamation updated their modeling and showed there's about a 57% chance of shortages in 2017, 2018. And really, on a long-term basis, shortages are probably going to occur more than half the time. So we have a chronic shortage problem on the Colorado River that isn't being helped by this current drought at all. So the states got together and developed, the states were aware of this chronic problem and said, we are going to develop a water supply and demand study to look at the long-term water supply imbalance in the Colorado River Basin. The report was finalized last December. And the study, it assessed the current and future water supply and demand imbalances over the next 50 years through the year 2060. And it was to develop and evaluate options and strategies for resolving those imbalances. So what the study found is, and this was new for the Bureau of Reclamation, is they tried to project the potential impacts of climate change on the Colorado River. Colorado River, by many climatologists, is ground zero for climate change. Certainly, it's supposed to be much hotter in the future than it is today, and that kind of makes sense because the whole theory of climate change is you cap the sun heats the ground, and then the heat can't escape through the atmosphere Well, where's the sunniest place in the United States? It's the desert Southwest. So what's most likely to be impacted? It's the Southwest. So the hot places will get hotter. Hope no one's planning to retire to Phoenix. But there was more uncertainty with the impacts of flow. Some models said the flow could be reduced by 20 or 30%. Some said the flow might not be reduced at all. So they took an average of all of the series of models, and the average reduction was about 9% over the next 50 years. So they had this slow reduction in runoff by 9% over a 50-year period. They also included increased demand because of population growth, and also increased agricultural demand with warmer temperatures. And they said that without future action, if we don't do anything else on the Colorado River, the imbalance will average 3.2 million acre-feet by the year 2060, a huge supply and demand gap with no further actions. However, the study didn't stop there. It also said, how can we close that gap? And it analyzed a number of, several numbers, 150, I think, different options, including conservation transfers and various augmentation. So yes, over 150 options were submitted. They were categorized into some that increase supply, such as water recycling, importation, desalination, reduce demand, or modify operations. For me personally, the study served a value. I get a lot of people calling my office with some ideas about they can solve all of Metropolitan's ideas with fill in the blank. Some of them are pretty good ideas. Some of them you have to kind of question. So with the study going on, I had a place to send the people to that would call me. I say, that's a great concept. Talk to the consultants doing the study, and they included it. So, and they did. They gave all of the options a fair shake based on implementability and cost and other things, and they ranked them all in the report. So I think two of the bigger options, the longer term, I guess what's called legacy projects in the study. One was a large desalination plant in Mexico. Building a desalination plant in the Gulf of California, piping the water up to Imperial Dam, and then by exchange having that water made available up the system. That's something that pretty expensive and a lot of issues with it, but it's something that it's worth further study. The other big option that was in the project was a pipeline from the Mississippi-Missouri River to the Front Range of Colorado. And then by exchange, having Denver and the Front Range take the Mississippi water and not divert water across the divide and leave that in the river. Last year, the Secretary of the Interior addressed the Basin study, and he said, we will look at the desalination option, but the federal government was not to look at the moving water from the Mississippi River. But the states themselves might be looking into that. They might turn out to be wild and crazy ideas, but at least they're being considered and given a fair shake. So our focus in that, of course, is to develop additional programs, and potentially to the extent that local projects and conservations were included in the study, and they certainly were, there might be outside funding like we currently have funding to help us with water recycling, maybe additional funding. And in my last few minutes, I do want to talk a little bit about our QSA, our agreement that we reached in 2003 of how we would divide the water of the Colorado River among our contractors. Now, when California had to reduce its use to 4.4, I said there were two ways of doing it. The second way was to reduce agricultural demand. And so Metropolitan and San Diego County Water Authority partnered with agricultural interests to help, on a voluntary basis, have them reduce their use. We have a program with Palo Verde Irrigation District where we pay farmers on a voluntary basis not to grow crops. It's a year-to-year decision. In years when we need a little bit more water, we pay them a little more. Like this year, and a few years ago when it was wetter, we let them go back to farming. And this shows the history of the amount of water we've gotten from the program since 2005. During the drought in Northern California, where we had very low state project allocations, we did a supplemental program that got even more on a one-time basis. We used the governor's emergency drought declaration to avoid having to do CEQA on additional transfers, and we were able to implement this supplemental program very quickly. But this program works really well because when we ramp up and down to meet our own needs, and then the farming community can maximize their use in other times. So right now, last year we're at the minimum, actually this year at the minimum, but we just issued a call to increase our fallowing back up to about the 65,000 level next year. The state of California paid to fund the lining of the All-American and Coachella canals. Those were completed about 5 years ago. That provides about 100,000 acre-feet. There are measures to help IID become more efficient. Metropolitan funds system efficiency programs to help them grow the same crops with less water. So we pay them every year a budget of about $10 million, and they line canals and put in sprinklers or tailwater recovery systems so that they can grow crops more efficiently. San Diego also has a program with IID. Currently, it's a fallowing-based program. So San Diego's program is a little different. Eventually, though, it too will switch to this system efficiency measures and get away from fallowing, because fallowing is very unpopular in the Imperial Valley, unlike the Palo Verde Valley. We have a creative agreement with Southern Nevada Water Authority. Nevada's use is down. They've been hit hard to the economy. They had been maximizing in fact, exceeding their apportionment 7 or 8 years ago. Their demands are down about 20 to 5%. So we reached an exchange agreement with Southern Nevada Water Authority. It's an agreement where in a year where Nevada doesn't use all of their water, like this year, like last year, like the year before, about 60,000 acre-feet, we will divert that water, and the agreement goes through 2016. And it's a 3-to-2 exchange. So we keep 1/3 of the water for our own use, and the remaining 2/3 we pay back to Nevada at a future year in 2020, after 2025. So Nevada didn't invest in Diamond Valley Lake. They don't have the ability to store water. So for Nevada, they get to store water with us at no cost, other than they lose 1/3 of their water. And then we have the ability then to get water when we need it. And we also absorb the carrying cost of that water. And my last 2 slides then, it has to do with the Salton Sea. And this is the one issue that continues to be a problem for us here in California. Salton Sea was formed in 1905 when the Colorado River overflowed its banks. It's been sustained by agricultural drainage ever since. It's currently about 40% saltier than the ocean and increases by about 1% per year. Many of the fish have gone, and soon those few remaining fish will be gone. And Salton Sea used to be a huge recreation area, all kinds of sports fish out there. It's still very important for migratory birds that feed on the fish. But it's getting to the point where it's going to become like Great Salt Lake or Alvin's Mono Lake at some point. And then comes this transfer to San Diego that would hasten the decline, because when you conserve water and transfer it to Southern California, there's less agricultural drainage, and the sea would become even saltier than it already was. So back in 2003, agreement was reached that IID would put 800,000 acre-feet of pure Colorado River water into the Salton Sea over a 15-year period to give the state of California time to solve the problem. The state came in 2003 and said, we think the Salton Sea is worth saving. We will come in and develop a plan, a restoration plan for the Salton Sea. They did an EIR in 2006 that said it's going to cost about $9 billion and $100 million annual O&M. When that preferred alternative came out, nobody touched it at all, and nothing's been happening since. But every year, water, hundreds of thousands of acre feet are going into the Salton Sea. So the sea is still a problem today because other than the EIR, the state hasn't really done much. There's been lawsuits filed by Imperial County saying that there's not enough environmental or the environmental compliance with the transfer wasn't significant. We won that lawsuit, but now it's being appealed again. So we're going to go through another round of litigation. At one point, IID in San Diego had filed a petition to reduce the mitigation starting in this year, but now IID's changed their mind. And so there's a lot of uncertainty and discontentment about what to do with the Salton Sea. And it's really uncertain now if the parties will accept that starting in 2017, which is right around the corner, or 2018, the Salton Sea will start to shrink rapidly and turn hypersaline quickly. And that's the current schedule. So unless the state gets involved and the parties get involved and find a solution to this dilemma, it's going to be a challenge for us on the river. So summary is the drought is returning, not just short-term drought, but chronic drought to the Colorado River. The short-term drought could increase the tension in the next few years. The states have gotten together to try to address this short-term issue. The Basin study is more long-term. The states started a process just a few months ago to say, what can we do in the next 2 years quickly to help avoid Lake Mead and Lake Powell getting to those critical elevations? So we are in the process of brainstorming ideas, so hopefully we'll come up with something soon. In the short term, Southern California is pretty protected. As Janine said, we have programs to help fill our aqueduct today, and we're largely protected from shortages. But long term, we realize there are issues on the river that we need to work with, and in the near term, the Salton Sea is something that we're going to have to get away, or we're going to face another an additional regulatory drought on the river. So thanks for your time this morning.
Questions for Bill?
Yes.
I have a question on the intentionally created surpluses. As I understand it, there are something like 7 specific types of new water or conservation modalities that qualify for ICS, like desalination or fallowing. If something new came along, a new technology that sucked water out of the air, or a new aquifer like Cadiz is proposing, how viable would those be for ICS? Are the rules rigid, or would you anticipate that something new would be, the rules would be adapted to allow for it?
Well, the rules are pretty straightforward. They were developed in 2007. So the rules say what types of ICS they are. It has to either be extraordinary conserved water, imported groundwater to the Colorado River, or tributary conservation. What can be added is exhibits, examples of those particular actions. So we have an agreement that has several exhibits. Fallowing is an exhibit, local desalination is an exhibit. If we have a new idea that we want to add, we could add it as an exhibit. The only thing that would be required is the other states would have to buy off on it, Arizona, Nevada, and the other contractors in California. Yes?
Yes, I noticed you didn't mention industrial uses. Are they not a significant factor in your master planning? Because I noticed you were heavy on ag, which obviously takes up most of the water. But as these demographics increase, especially in the Southwest, historians call it neo-nativism, where a lot of people, the burgeoning population in Arizona, et cetera. But they also, I would think in my mind, would also increase the demand for industrial.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, new energy exploration is a huge potential increase in demand, as well as even solar energy has a small increase in demand. But the fracking and other types of exploration in the upper basin has a potential for a big impact in demand, and that was included in the basin study.